I thought I'd pause to show a few thoughts on grids and just basics of setting up your comp files before you start your projects for web design. So in web design, obviously, just like any design, we're going to use grids. Before we started implementing this into the projects and more scrutiny, we noticed that students weren't really aligning elements and putting things together. So I've got a few things just to show you guys. So obviously a grid, we'll show you how it works in Photoshop. This is an older grid system, but what's nice about it is it shows you some examples of how elements in a website will align sometimes from maybe the top to the bottom, or for instance, when you have a lot of different design elements, if you show the grid, you're able to see how the sides of things align. And even though they don't show a horizontal grid, you can see the alignment going across as well. So as we design, we usually have some sort of grid system to refer to. This initial grid system that I have up is a 960 grid. It's a little bit older, so we don't use it, but it does, again, have some examples for you guys to preview to see how the grid kind of comes together. A more common one for beginners to use today is the 1200 pixel grid system. So the web address is just 1200px.com. And so you will see the download of the Photoshop file. And once you download that, you are able to then bring it into Photoshop. I know they have a lot of other options here, but for beginners, you guys usually shouldn't have to change too much. So I wouldn't worry about the Illustrator files or the CSS files. Just download the Photoshop. So when I take you over to the Photoshop file, this is what opens up. And I find a lot of students new to web design, they're still relatively new to Photoshop. Even if they have 1 or 2, maybe 3 semesters of Photoshop, they're still learning the basics of how to manipulate files. So we're going to start out by looking at the image size. And this thing is actually obviously 72 dpi for web. And it is also 1200 pixels wide, that's why we call it a 1200 pixel grid system. And the height is 800 pixels. So first step I just need to clarify with everybody is when you're designing for the web, we need to make sure everything's 72 dpi. So if you start your comps with this file, you know for a fact it's 72 dpi. Also, another thing is you want to make sure it's RGB. So I know a lot of students come out of print classes and they might even want to put a website in their portfolio. We don't care about CMYK for the web. We're going to use RGB files. So I'll go back to image size real quick. In the web, we use pixels. I know initially it had brought up inches, but the inches are totally irrelevant in web design. So we are going to go to pixels, and basically every pixel is going to make up our web comp. And so we've got 72 pixels in an inch. That means it's a lower resolution file, but for the web it's perfect. It's going to be really fast to load and really quick for us as we're designing as well. So from there, I'm just going to go ahead and say okay and just introduce you to a few things in the file. I'm just going to zoom in real quick and show you the grid system. So I believe this has 15 columns. And basically, these little pink areas are just basically things, little like graphical elements, rectangles that somebody has created. And we can hide or show that at any point, okay? And then we are also able to go into our view and we're able to turn off our guides and turn them back on at any point. So if you haven't used guides that often in Photoshop, just know that these are things that we can turn on and we can turn off. You'll notice that that was just checked, so sometimes it's deceiving. So you just check it again and it comes back on. So these could definitely be manipulated, but they're right now perfectly measured to be an equal distance, an equal width, as well as an equal distance in between. At any point you are able to just hover over a guide and move it, or you can go to these layers and unlock them and move them. I don't think you need to for this, but in some cases you may actually want to maybe create a new guide that is different from this, maybe horizontal guides, or you may want to create another guide to create another form of measurement to be able to align things to. Again, at any point, you can just drag them right off and they go away. Other than that, the overall file is set up for you to begin. One of the common questions we get of students is, what size should my website be? We like for you at a beginning level to start with a 1200 pixel grid. And what that means is the width of your website is going to be 1200 pixels. Usually that equates to a full width of our website as well. So keep that in mind. In some cases, you may want to use a background. And if you do, you may want to actually increase the canvas size just a little bit. Same thing with the height. So most websites aren't just 800 pixels high. So we're going to go in and actually change the image size. So if we were to just change the canvas size versus image size, there is a difference. So the image size changes the entire image size. The canvas size actually changes the size of the artboard. So in this case, we can change 1200 to 1500. And that'll give us a little bit of room if we wanted to have a background. So it's not necessarily a requirement, but it gives you an option. And then we also have the option here for a height. And you may not know this number in the beginning, so that's quite all right. And then we're going to go ahead and change this. Let's just say 2000. We also have the option of what we want that background color to be. So you guys can see behind that pink is white. So I'm just going to choose white. You do have other options though, so just so you know, you can choose like a different background color if you wanted to. So we're going to just go ahead and leave that as is. And then the other thing is, we want to be able to move what's in the current canvas. So maybe if you had already started designing, we want it to go to the very top. So anything new for this canvas will go below it. So these little arrows here will allow your document to show where the current pixels that are in the current document will go. So I'm going to click the top center because I want the new on the side to be moved proportionally to the center. But anything additional is going to go below it. So from there, we'll just go ahead and say okay. And now you can see what happens. So we've got a bigger canvas that we can work on for a website. And the challenge now is that we have these pink bars that need to be a little bit longer. So there's always a couple different ways that we could do things. We're going to unlock, and it unlocked all my layers, thankfully. So I'm just going to see if I can select the group and do a free transform. And that should allow me to transform the entire group. And I'm just going to change the size of these so they vertically extend. It's just solid pixels, so it's really not changing anything with the quality, but it'll change that size for us. So now they extend the full length of this. So hopefully that helps you just with your initial file setup. We'll do another screencast in just a little bit to show using background images and some basics for getting started. But this is kind of the basics of getting started for setting your file up.